On Christmas morning, in the middle of a holiday gathering that was supposed to be about family, my own son locked the front door, stood in front of it, and said flatly, "You are not part of this family anymore. Leave." Behind him, his wife was barely holding back laughter, her shoulders shaking as if this were all some private joke. I did not shout or argue. I simply nodded, walked outside into the cold, sat in my car, and made a single phone call. 5 minutes later, every guest quietly stood up from the dining table, collected their coats, and left one by one. They were soon alone in a silent house. What happened that day was a betrayal, and I answered it by pulling the foundation out from under their carefully staged holiday. Earlier that same day, my son had said something that still echoed painfully in my chest. "Dad, why can you not be more like Richard? He is a real man with real money." The words slammed into me like a blunt object. I stopped just inside the living room doorway and stared at him. His name was now Evan, my only son, standing there adjusting a luxury watch on his wrist that likely cost more than I lived on in a month. His tailored coat fit him perfectly, every seam advertising success. Everything about his appearance was polished, expensive, and deliberately distant from the life I had lived. "What did you just say to me?" I asked, my voice coming out softer than I expected, almost swallowed by the room. Evan sighed and rolled his eyes, the same look he used when he was 16 and I asked him to mow the lawn. Except now it carried adult cruelty instead of teenage impatience. "You heard me," he said. "Richard Coleman built something real. Look around you." He waved his hand at my modest living room, at the old but clean sofa where I had sat for years, helping him with homework, quizzing him before exams, listening to his worries about school. Heat surged through my chest. "Every nail I hammered paid for your education," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Every single one. And that college did not help you much until you married Lauren." Evan straightened his silk tie with slow, intentional movements. "Richard gave me real opportunities, connections, influence. You just held me back with that construction worker mindset." My hands trembled as I held onto the doorframe. "So 40 years of double shifts, missed dinners, aching joints, and working through pain all amount to me holding you back?" I asked. "I built everything I had for you, and what does that make me now?" He smirked. "A father who lives in a house that looks exactly like what he does for a living." His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Do you have any idea how awkward it is when Lauren's friends ask about my family? Richard owns half the commercial property in downtown Phoenix. And you own, what? Tools?" Something inside me finally broke. I pointed toward the door. "Get out," I said. "Now." "Stop pretending to be wounded," Evan replied as he walked past me. "I outgrew this place a long time ago. I outgrew you." Each step he took echoed with contempt. "Some people are meant for more." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the framed family photos on the mantel. Suddenly, the house felt hollow. I stood there in the silence, trying to understand how the boy I taught to ride a bike and drove to every baseball practice had just erased 40 years of my life with a few sentences. Outside, I heard metal scraping against concrete, footsteps crunching over gravel. Something heavy was being dragged. I was too emotionally drained to care. I lowered myself into my favorite chair, the one with a small tear in the leather from when Evan was a child and attacked it with scissors during an ill-advised art project. I moved through the rest of the evening like a shadow, hanging my work shirt in the closet with automatic motions. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I saw a 70-year-old man who suddenly looked every bit his age. Evan's words followed me everywhere. A real man with real money. As I brushed my teeth, another memory surfaced. Evan, at 8 years old, proudly holding the toolbox I gave him for Christmas. "My dad builds everything," he told his friends, his face glowing with pride. Somewhere along the way, that pride had turned into embarrassment. I remembered working until 3 in the morning on the Sanderson job and then driving straight to Evan's high school graduation without sleep. My clothes were stained with coffee and dust, my hands rough and cracked, but I was there. He hugged me afterward and whispered, "Thanks for always showing up, Dad." Those same hands were now proof to him that I was not enough. Paying for college meant 18-hour days for 3 straight years. I missed holidays, skipped weekends, and gave up trips with friends. Every extra dollar went into his tuition fund. "I want you to have choices I never did," I told him. At the time, he understood, or at least I thought he did. Everything changed after his first visit to Richard Coleman's estate. I could still picture that autumn night when he came back from dinner with Lauren's family, his eyes burning with a hunger I did not recognize. "Dad, you would not believe their house," he said. "Wine cellar, marble floors, art that costs more than our entire block." At first, the comparisons were subtle. Richard says investment portfolios are safer than pensions. Then they grew sharper. Maybe engineering was the wrong degree. Soon he looked around my home as if seeing it for the first time, measuring it against something else. His calls grew shorter. Invitations became rare. "Lauren's family has something planned," became his usual excuse. I noticed how his voice changed when he spoke about Richard, admiring, respectful, the same way he used to speak about me. Last Christmas, he arrived late and brought expensive gifts that felt transactional instead of loving. "Richard is teaching me about tax strategies," he said casually. "Even charity can be leveraged." Even my gifts became lectures. I watched my son turn from a boy who admired his working-class father into a man ashamed of where he came from. Each visit showed new changes: luxury clothes, confident talk about investments, casual mentions of exclusive clubs. What happened today was not sudden. It was the end result of years of quiet distance. Richard Coleman did not just gain a son-in-law. He took my son. Not intentionally, perhaps, but simply by existing in a world where my sacrifices no longer seemed to matter. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to remember the last time Evan asked how I was doing, how my health was, or whether I was happy. The silence did not begin that night. It stretched back months, maybe even years. I lay there wondering when I had become invisible to the child around whom I had built my entire existence. The house spoke in its usual language as I lay awake, the soft groans of wood settling, the faint shifts in the foundation, familiar sounds that had once meant safety. This same house, the one Evan now looked down on with embarrassment, had sheltered him through fevers, nightmares, birthdays, and every childhood crisis he ever had. Sleep finally claimed me sometime after midnight, but even then I could not escape his voice. Some people are meant for bigger things. The meaning was clear. I was not one of those people. Morning light pushed through the curtains, sharp and unforgiving. My body protested as I sat up, each stiff joint reminding me that 70 years had taken their toll. The clock on the nightstand read 8:15 in the morning, much later than my usual routine, but the emotional exhaustion from the day before had drained me more deeply than any job site ever had. I shuffled toward the bathroom, deliberately avoiding the mirror. I already knew what I would see. Coffee pulled at me from the kitchen, promising a small sense of normalcy in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar, one where my own son viewed me as an inconvenience. Getting dressed felt strange, almost disconnected. I pulled on my old flannel shirt and work jeans, moving automatically, while fragments of Evan's words replayed in my head. Worker mentality. The phrase dug into me like a splinter I could not remove. Overnight, December snow had fallen, covering my quiet Phoenix neighborhood in a clean, deceptive blanket of white. Everything looked softer, calmer, more peaceful than it truly was. Normally, my morning routine anchored me. Brew the coffee, grab the newspaper, ease into the day. Retirement had made those rituals important. But the moment I stepped outside into the cold morning air, something felt wrong. My mailbox sat crooked on its post, twisted toward the street, the door bent wide open. I walked closer, my breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. This was no accident. The metal was warped inward, as if someone had swung a bat or crowbar at it with force and intention. Fresh gouges scarred the surface, and the post itself wobbled loosely in the ground. "Damn kids," I muttered automatically, but the damage told a different story. This was not reckless fun. This was deliberate, personal. The metallic scraping I had heard the night before suddenly made sense. I crouched to inspect the base, my knees aching as I lowered myself. Footprints surrounded the mailbox, clear impressions in the snow. Adult boots, probably a size 10 or 11. The cold seeped through my clothes as I tried to piece together what had happened after Evan stormed out. As I walked back toward the house with the newspaper tucked under my arm, a slow unease crawled up my spine. In 4 decades of living here, no one had ever vandalized my property. The timing felt too precise to ignore. Inside my warm kitchen, I poured coffee into my favorite mug and spread the paper across the table. The familiarity should have settled me, but my mind would not cooperate. The words on the page blurred together as my thoughts kept circling back to the mailbox, to Evan's contempt, to the growing feeling that yesterday had not been the end of it. I considered calling the police, then dismissed the idea. What would I even say? That my mailbox had been destroyed the same night my son disowned me? I imagined the looks I would get. Another elderly man grasping for meaning where none existed. The coffee cooled untouched as I stared at headlines I could not absorb. Sports scores, weather updates, local events. None of it broke through the heavy fog of unease pressing down on me. Something was unfinished, as if yesterday's confrontation had only opened the door to something worse. I turned to the crossword puzzle, a habit that usually gave my mind a place to rest. 7 across caught my eye. Betrayal by a relative. I stared at the clue, stunned by the irony, but even that could not coax out a laugh. The clock ticked steadily toward 9. Outside, life went on. Garage doors lifted, engines started. Neighbors backed out of driveways, unaware that my world had cracked open. Then the phone rang. I watched it ring 3 times before answering, expecting a robocall or a wrong number. The voice on the other end was the last one I wanted to hear. "Dad, it is me." It was Evan. His tone was smooth, almost sweet. completely different from the cruelty of the day before. "Evan," I said carefully, keeping my voice even, "I have been thinking all night about what happened yesterday," he continued. "I really overreacted. I said things I did not mean, and I am truly sorry." The words sounded practiced, flowing too easily. My hand tightened around the receiver. After 40 years of raising him, I knew when Evan was lying. He had refined it into a skill. "You seemed pretty certain yesterday," I replied quietly. No, that is exactly it," he rushed on. "I was under a lot of stress. Work, money, everything. You know how Lauren's family can be." He laughed, but it rang hollow. A chill settled in my stomach. The Evan from yesterday had been vicious, but at least he had been honest. This version frightened me more. "That is actually why I am calling," he continued. "Lauren and I want you to come to Christmas dinner tomorrow night. Nothing big, just Lauren's father, a few of his business partners, and some relatives. Very successful people." "Christmas dinner?" The words caught in my throat. 6 o'clock, he said. "Lauren is making her roast. It will be nice." Every instinct I had warned me to say no. Still, some desperate part of me wanted to believe my son felt regret. I suppose I could come," I said. "Great," Evan replied. "Oh, and Dad, maybe wear that nice suit from Mom's funeral. First impressions matter with Richard's associates." The line went quiet, but not completely. I could hear voices in the background, distant but clear enough. "He actually bought it," Evan said, laughing softly. "Did you hear the hope in his voice?" "You are awful," Lauren replied, more entertained than upset. "But I have to admit, this could be interesting." The call disconnected, leaving me staring at the phone, my unease finally settling into something colder and far more dangerous. "Richard is going to love this," Lauren said, her voice light and pleased. "His successful business standing next to your construction worker father. The contrast will be perfect. And do not forget the legacy." She laughed softly before adding, "My dad needs to see very clearly how much better his world is than yours. This dinner locks in his inheritance in the company." Evan responded without hesitation, "Exactly. By the end of the night, Joseph will look completely insignificant next to Richard's associates. Dad will see how devoted we are to him and that there is no one else who matters." My hand trembled so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. The depth and precision of their cruelty struck me like a physical blow to the chest. This had never been about repairing anything between us. I was being used as a prop, a tool in their effort to manipulate Richard Coleman. I placed the phone back onto its cradle with care, my entire body shaking. They had planned every detail, not just a dinner, but a staged apology, a calculated setup, and a public humiliation designed in advance. My son had not simply turned away from me. He had decided to weaponize me. The kitchen felt smaller, the walls closing in as the full weight of what I had overheard settled over me. This was not disappointment. This was not family conflict. This was deliberate cruelty designed to strip away what little dignity I had left. I collapsed into the chair, the newspaper slipping from my lap and crumpling onto the floor. For several long minutes, I could not move. I could not think. All I heard was their laughter and the casual way they discussed my humiliation as if they were planning entertainment. Then something shifted. It was not the hollow defeat I had felt the day before. This was different, sharper, focused. If they believed they could toy with my emotions, parade me as evidence of their superiority and enjoy my humiliation as part of their strategy, they were about to learn something they had forgotten. This old builder still knew how to stand his ground. The phone sat silently on the counter, but my mind was already moving. My hands continued to shake as the words repeated in my head. Father. The builder, not Dad, not Joseph, just a label, a classification, a social ranking they thought explained everything. I gripped the armrest until my knuckles turned white, fighting the dizziness creeping up on me. Lauren's giggle replayed in my head, sharp and cruel, the sound of someone who found genuine pleasure in plotting another person's humiliation. "This is going to be interesting," she had said, as if my dignity were nothing more than dinner entertainment. But it was Evan's voice that cut the deepest. He had heard the hope in my voice when I accepted their invitation. He recognized it, and he enjoyed it. My own son had turned my love for him into ammunition. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. 70 years of life, 45 years of marriage, 37 years of fatherhood, reduced to a supporting role in their performance for Richard Coleman. They were not just rejecting me. They were planning to turn my working-class life into a spectacle. A photograph on the refrigerator caught my eye. Evan's high school graduation. The two of us stood side by side, smiling proudly beside his diploma. I had worked 18-hour days to afford that private school. Now he intended to use those same sacrifices as proof of his own superiority. Something settled firmly in my chest, not grief, not anger, resolve. My father's voice came back to me from long ago. After neighborhood bullies cornered me as a boy, he said, "You can stay on the ground and let them enjoy it, or you can stand up and show them who you are." I walked to the living room window and stared at my damaged mailbox. The vandalism finally made sense. It was not random. It was psychological pressure meant to leave me shaken and compliant before their invitation. They had orchestrated everything: the property damage, the false apology, the carefully timed dinner, everything except one thing. They assumed I would never know. I moved to the desk drawer where I kept important contacts. Richard Coleman's business card was there. He had handed it to me last year at Evan's birthday dinner, shaking my hand firmly. "Call any time, Joseph," he had said. "We should talk more." At the time, I respected his straightforwardness. Despite his wealth, he had shown no pretense. Now that card meant something else entirely. Opportunity. My mind shifted into familiar territory, analyzing the situation with the same precision I once used to review blueprints and construction schedules. They wanted to humiliate me in front of Richard to demonstrate his superiority and secure their future. But what would happen if Richard learned the truth first? What if he discovered that his own daughter and son-in-law were manipulating him into participating in cruelty toward an elderly family member? Men do not build empires by tolerating dishonesty. From my limited interactions with Richard, I knew he valued integrity more than appearances. He would not appreciate being turned into an unwitting accomplice in psychological abuse. The phone number on the card seemed to pulse as I held it. One conversation could change everything. Not revenge, justice. The kind that ensures manipulation carries consequences. I glanced at the kitchen clock. 9 o'clock in the morning. Richard would already be at his office, reviewing contracts, making decisions. A perfectly reasonable time for a call between businessmen, even a retired one. For the first time since Evan walked out, I felt something solid beneath my feet. Purpose. Finding the card took longer than expected. I had filed it carefully among insurance policies and warranty documents, the same meticulous organization that had guided me through decades of engineering work. When I finally held it again, my hands had stopped shaking. In their place was steady focus. Tomorrow night, I would not be anyone's prop. The business card felt solid between my fingers. Thick, high-quality stock that spoke of success earned through discipline and work, not handed down through family lines. Coleman Commercial Development. Richard Coleman, Managing Director. Beneath his name were two numbers, a direct office line and a personal mobile number. No layers of assistance, no barriers, just access. That alone told me a lot about the man. I lowered myself into my reading chair, positioned so I could see both the front window and the kitchen clock, and held the phone in my hand. This was not a call to rush. Precision mattered more than speed. I asked myself exactly what I needed to say. The truth, obviously, but delivered carefully. Richard needed to understand that his daughter and my son were manipulating him, turning family dinners into staged performances designed to impress him and secure their inheritance. But if I sounded like a bitter old man airing family grievances, the message would be lost. I rehearsed quietly. "Richard, this is Joseph Taylor. I'm calling about tomorrow evening." Too stiff. "Hello, Richard. Joseph here. We need to talk about Evan and Lauren." Too aggressive. The balance had to be right. Respect without submission, honesty without accusation. The facts were straightforward. I had overheard a conversation that revealed their intentions for the dinner. They planned to humiliate me in front of him, to use the contrast between my working life and his business world as proof of their loyalty to him. They had even vandalized my property to unsettle me emotionally and make me compliant. Trust would be critical. That meant acknowledging my personal stake while staying grounded and factual. "Richard, I know this puts you in an uncomfortable position, but I believe you deserve to know what is being planned." Not asking him to take sides, appealing to his sense of fairness. One concern lingered. What if Lauren was with him? Father and daughter mornings were common in family businesses. If that was the case, I would offer to call back later. Still, something told me not to wait. Delay would only invite doubt, and doubt was the enemy of clarity. Richard had always struck me as a man who preferred uncomfortable truths over comfortable illusions. I picked up the phone again, the card steady in my hand, and took a deep breath. This conversation would decide whether tomorrow night became their victory or their undoing, whether manipulation would win or whether honesty would. My fingers moved automatically as I dialed, guided by decades of professional habit. Important calls, emergency decisions, contracts that could not be undone, each number deliberate. The phone rang. Richard answered. I told him everything, calmly, clearly, with no expectation that he would believe me. To my surprise, he did. I heard the shift in his voice almost immediately. Confusion, then anger, tightly controlled. He asked questions, precise ones. I answered them all. When I explained what I intended to do, he paused only briefly before agreeing to help. That was all I needed. The next evening, I drove into the Hillcrest neighborhood of Denver, a place that felt unreal to me. Curving streets lined with Mercedes and BMWs gleamed under carefully placed streetlights. Massive homes rose behind wrought iron gates, trimmed with Christmas lights that looked professionally installed. Each house could have sheltered 3 families like mine. Evan and Lauren's home sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its limestone exterior glowing under soft spotlights. In the circular driveway, Richard's black Bentley stood like a monument, surrounded by other luxury vehicles that likely cost more than my yearly pension. The scene looked like a magazine spread titled, "How the Other Half Lives." I parked my aging Honda beside a polished Porsche. The contrast was almost laughable. Through the tall front windows, I could see figures moving around the dining room. Richard's associates, no doubt. Tonight's intended audience. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, straightened my tie, and adjusted my jacket. The dark blue suit I had worn to my wife's funeral still fit, though the fabric showed its age. That was exactly what Evan and Lauren were counting on. I stepped out of the car. As I walked along the spotless stone path, my posture was upright and my breathing steady. Let them enjoy their confidence. Justice often arrives quietly. Before I could reach the doorbell, the front door swung open. Evan stood there, framed by warm golden light. His tailored suit was flawless. His expression carried the same cruel satisfaction I had heard in his voice the day before. "Well," he said loudly, making sure the room behind him could hear, "look who decided to show up." "Did you really think you belonged here tonight?" Lauren appeared behind him, perfectly on cue. Her black cocktail dress shimmered softly, probably worth more than my monthly grocery bill. Her smile was sharp, eager. "Oh, this is wonderful," she said. "He actually came." Evan stepped forward, blocking the doorway completely. Every inch of his body language radiated control. "Dad," he said, raising his voice just enough for maximum effect, "let me be very clear." The cold air seemed to thicken. "You are no longer part of our family. Lauren's parents are our family now. You need to leave." Inside, conversation stalled. Heads turned. People watched with that uncomfortable curiosity reserved for public humiliations. Lauren laughed behind him, delighted. "Look at his face. It is even better than we imagined." But instead of the collapse they expected, I felt something unexpected. Calm. Completion. This was exactly what I had prepared for, exactly what Richard needed to see confirmed. "I understand," I said evenly. My lack of reaction unsettled them. "Evan," I continued, meeting his eyes without flinching, "I hope you receive everything you deserve tonight." His smile faltered. "Everything?" he repeated, confusion flickering across his face. This was not the script. He had expected shame, pleading, a broken old man proving his inferiority. Instead, he was staring at someone who already knew how the evening would end. "That is right," Evan sneered, though his voice lacked the certainty it had moments earlier. "Go back to your little builder's house where you belong." The insult landed flat, weakened by my calm. I turned away without another word and walked back toward my car, my posture straight despite the biting December cold. Behind me, I could hear Evan's forced laughter and Lauren's sharp comments, but they sounded distant now, like noise from another room. None of it mattered anymore. I slid into the driver's seat of my old Honda and paused, watching the house through the windshield. Behind those glowing, expensive windows, Richard's guests continued sipping wine and chatting, unaware that the evening they expected was already over. What they were about to witness would be something else entirely. I took out my phone and dialed Richard's number. It rang twice. Joseph, he answered, his voice steady and composed. As we discussed, I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the house where my son believed he had just secured his greatest triumph. I understand completely, Richard replied at once. His tone carried the calm authority of a man used to making decisive choices. Thank you for letting me know. The call ended there. No speeches, no reassurances, just two men who understood that some betrayals require swift action. Inside the house, Richard raised his wineglass. Conversation gradually faded as Denver's business elite turned toward him, expecting a warm holiday toast. Friends, Richard began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room. On this Christmas Eve, I want to speak about family values, real values, the kind that matter more than social status or financial success. Evan and Lauren exchanged pleased looks, clearly interpreting this as praise, as confirmation that their performance had worked. Today, Richard continued evenly, I learned about people who value money over character, people who manipulate family relationships for personal gain. Evan's smile stiffened. I also learned about those who treat older family members as props in their pursuit of influence and inheritance. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Guests shifted in their seats. There is a profound difference, Richard went on, between inherited wealth and earned dignity, between those who elevate themselves by humiliating others and those who keep their integrity regardless of their bank balance. Lauren's smile vanished completely now. Several guests exchanged knowing glances. So tonight, Richard said calmly, setting his glass down, I choose to spend Christmas Eve with people who understand loyalty, respect, and basic human decency. I will not remain in this house, nor will I support behavior rooted in greed and manipulation. The silence that followed was heavy and unmistakable. Then Richard turned and walked toward the front door, his decision executed with the same efficiency that had built his empire. Richard, wait! Evan called out, panic breaking through his voice. Dad, please, you do not understand. Lauren tried, rushing after him, but Richard was already reaching for his coat. None of the guests needed clarification. In Denver's social circles, when Richard Coleman left, you followed. One by one, people began gathering their belongings, offering polite excuses that fooled no one. This is all a misunderstanding, Evan shouted, desperation rising. We can explain. Explanations were irrelevant. Within minutes, the elegant dinner dissolved into chaos, guests quietly abandoning the house. Richard was the first to step into the cold night air. He walked with calm purpose toward my parked Honda. Behind him followed three others, successful men who had just witnessed something rare. Joseph, Richard said warmly as he reached my car, I believe we have a better place to spend Christmas Eve. Do we? I unlocked the doors. Then follow me, gentlemen. It is not far. The convoy formed naturally. My aging Honda led the way, followed by Bentleys and Mercedes gliding through the Denver streets. In my rearview mirror, the procession looked almost ceremonial. From the passenger seat, Richard finally spoke again. I have to ask, how did you know to prepare for this? How did you see it coming? After I overheard their conversation yesterday morning, I called you, I said, watching the traffic light change. But even before that, I had been watching Evan change for months. One of the guests leaned forward. Did you really arrange another dinner? A full Christmas meal, I answered honestly. I prepared it today. Having a backup plan seemed wise. Richard nodded with genuine respect. Most people would have avoided this entirely or walked in unprepared. You did neither. 40 years in construction teaches you that, I replied. You always plan for contingencies, especially when dealing with unreliable people. The irony of saying that about my own son did not escape me. We turned into my neighborhood where modest houses sat close together, warm Christmas lights glowing softly in small yards. The atmosphere felt real, unpolished, and welcoming, in a way money could never manufacture. That is exactly what I was trying to say, Richard remarked, looking around. True wealth is not measured in cars or clothes. It is measured by character. You gave them the outcome they earned. The luxury cars parked along my street, out of place yet strangely respectful. Guests stepped out, not with disdain, but with curiosity. As we approached my front door, Richard paused. I should tell you, he said quietly, I am ending all business relationships with Evan immediately, and with Lauren. Pain flickered across his face. She will inherit far less than she expected. I am sorry for that, I said sincerely. I never wanted to come between you and your daughter. You did not, Richard replied firmly. You simply exposed what was already there. He stopped at the bottom of my steps and looked back at the line of cars behind us, then at my home. And this, he added, is exactly where I would rather be tonight. These people, Richard said, gesturing toward everyone gathered around us, respect what you did tonight. And so do I. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson from next door peeked through her curtains, clearly puzzled by the line of luxury vehicles parked along our modest block. She was probably wondering whether I had won the lottery or somehow joined an exclusive club. In a way, I had. I had found myself surrounded by people who valued honesty more than inheritance. Welcome to my home, I said, pulling my keys from my pocket. Warm light spilled through the windows and across the porch, and I noticed several of them pause when they saw the dining table inside, already set for exactly the number of people now standing behind me. The evening was clearly not over. Opening the front door felt almost ceremonial. The soft glow of my living room revealed the Christmas tree I had decorated with ornaments collected over decades of marriage and fatherhood. Each piece carried a memory. Through the archway, the dining table stood ready, set for 8, with my late wife's best china, dishes I had nearly forgotten I still owned. My goodness, Joseph, Richard said as he stepped inside first, his eyes taking everything in. Did you really prepare all of this? I started cooking around noon, I replied, taking coats and hanging them by the door. It felt like the right thing to do. The house was filled with the smell of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and apple pie, the unmistakable scent of a real holiday. In the kitchen, every dish waited in perfect order, timed and ready. The guests moved through my home slowly, respectfully, pausing at framed family photos and handmade decorations. They were people accustomed to luxury, to catered events and polished perfection, yet they seemed more at ease here than they ever had at Evan's carefully curated display of wealth. This actually feels like Christmas, one of them said, settling into my favorite chair. Not something staged for appearances. I began carrying dishes from the kitchen. The turkey was golden and carefully carved, mashed potatoes rich with real butter, green beans from my own garden that I had frozen during the summer. Without hesitation, Richard joined me, lifting bowls and placing them on the table as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "When was the last time you saw me serve dinner?" he asked quietly as he filled water glasses. "I usually have staff for that." "Tonight, we are just people sharing a meal," I said, setting down the last plate. The contrast was almost surreal. Richard Coleman, a man whose name dominated Denver's commercial real estate, was helping an elderly builder serve Christmas dinner, and somehow it felt exactly right. His partners praised the food with genuine appreciation. "This turkey is outstanding," one of them said. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" 45 years of marriage," I answered, pouring wine from bottles I had saved for special occasions. "My wife made sure I learned before she passed." The conversation unfolded naturally. Stories of family traditions, early struggles, and hard-earned lessons replaced talk of contracts and profits. These wealthy men relaxed, laughed, and shared memories of their own modest beginnings and the people who had shaped their character. When the plates were nearly cleared, Richard raised his glass. "Joseph," he said, his voice sincere, "thank you, not just for telling me the truth today, but for reminding all of us what genuine hospitality looks like." "And what real family means," another guest added. "It is not about bloodlines or money. It is about who stands with you when it matters." I rose slowly from my chair. The room fell quiet. The lights from the Christmas tree cast warm shadows across faces that had become allies, perhaps even friends, in a single evening. Then headlights flashed across the front window. 2 more cars pulled up behind the others, engines cutting off abruptly as if driven by panic rather than planning. I lifted my glass, looking around the table at faces glowing with warmth and satisfaction. "To family," I began, "not the one we are born into, but the one we choose, the people who value character over—" The front door burst open. Evan stormed into the living room, Lauren close behind him. Their expensive clothes were wrinkled now, their confidence replaced by desperation. "How dare you!" Evan shouted, his voice cracking as he took in the scene. Richard and the guests seated comfortably at my table, glasses raised, laughter still lingering in the air. "How dare you steal our guests!" The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped. Glasses were lowered. Chairs shifted as everyone witnessed the raw display of entitlement and fury. Richard's face darkened, not with anger toward me, but with shame for the daughter standing beside Evan, tears streaking her carefully made-up face. "I did not steal anyone," I said evenly, still holding my glass. "I simply offered them a place where they would be welcomed, not used." "You manipulated them!" Lauren shrieked, pointing at me. "You turned them against us with your poor me stories and that pathetic old man routine." One of Richard's partners cleared his throat politely. "Actually, we left because of the toast Richard gave about family values. It was enlightening." Evan turned to the guests, his panic now unmistakable. "He is lying. He is just a bitter old builder who cannot accept that his son surpassed him. He ruined our dinner out of jealousy." "Surpassed him?" Richard's voice cut through the room, cold and precise. "Is that what you call planning to humiliate your father to impress me?" Lauren rushed to Richard's side and dropped to her knees beside his chair. "Daddy, please, you do not understand. We were trying to show you how much we love you." "By making Joseph the subject of ridicule?" Richard asked quietly. "By turning his humiliation into entertainment?" That is not how it was, Evan insisted, but even he sounded unsure. For the first time all evening, the room felt truly silent. We only wanted to show the contrast between, Evan began, but his sentence collapsed under the weight of the room's silence. Lauren's sobs filled the gap, muffled and desperate. Around the table, the expressions were unmistakable. Sympathy for me, disgust for them. These were men and women who had built real success, and they knew exactly what they were witnessing, a complete absence of character. Evan's face flushed deep red, anger and panic colliding. He spun toward me, his voice cracking. "You destroyed everything. Do you have any idea what this cost us? Richard's legacy was our future." "Your future was never built on anything solid," Richard said, rising slowly from his chair. The authority in his movement commanded instant attention. The room stilled. "It was built on manipulation," Richard continued, his voice steady and unyielding, "on greed and on the belief that I would never see who you truly are." Lauren looked up at him, tears streaking her face. "Dad, please." "No." The single word carried absolute finality. Richard stood fully now, the same commanding presence that had carried him through decades of leadership. His eyes moved between his daughter and son-in-law with the cold focus of a man who had just discovered rot in the foundation of something he once trusted. "Lauren, Evan," he said, his voice echoing through my dining room with devastating clarity. "Tonight, you revealed yourselves to be exactly the kind of people I spent my entire career avoiding. Manipulative, greedy, fundamentally dishonest." "Dad, you cannot," Lauren started, but Richard raised his hand. "I can, and I will." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Effective immediately," Richard said. "Evan is terminated from all business relationships with Coleman Commercial Development. Your job, your access, your involvement in any family ventures ended." Evan's face drained of color. "Richard, please, let me explain." "There is nothing to explain," Richard replied, "and there is more." The air grew heavy. "My will be rewritten next week," he said calmly. "Lauren, your inheritance will reflect exactly what Evan brought into this marriage. Nothing. The majority of my estate will be redirected to organizations that understand the value of helping others without expecting profit in return." "You cannot do that," Lauren screamed, leaping to her feet. "I am your daughter." "Yes," Richard said quietly, "you are. And tonight you showed me who you chose to be." Pain flickered across his face, but his resolve never wavered. A person willing to humiliate an elderly man for advantage. Someone who values money more than decency. Around the table, his partners nodded. These were people who recognized accountability when they saw it. Evan made one final attempt. "This is his fault." He pointed at me, hands shaking. "He poisoned you against us. He lied." "Joseph told me the truth," Richard replied simply. "Something neither of you were willing to do." I stood slowly, feeling both vindicated and profoundly tired. "Evan," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I am sorry it ended like this. I truly am. But you crossed this line the moment you decided my love was something to exploit instead of respect." "Save your fake sympathy," Evan spat, though his voice broke. "You ruined our lives." "No," I answered quietly. "You did that yourselves. I just made sure the consequences finally arrived." Lauren grabbed Evan's arm and yanked him toward the door. "Let us go. We do not need any of them." But even as she said it, reality settled in. No business, no inheritance, no network. Nothing left but each other and the aftermath of their choices. They left without another word. The door closed behind them with a sound that felt final, like the end of a long and painful chapter. The silence that followed was different. It was not awkward or tense. It was clean, settled. Richard sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every bit of his 65 years. "Joseph," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology for their behavior and for not seeing it sooner." "No apology is needed," I replied, returning to my seat. "We often see what we want to see in the people we love." One of the guests raised his glass. "To real family values and to people who live them, not just talk about them." "And to second chances," Richard added, smiling faintly. "Sometimes the family we need is not the one we are born into, but the one we are fortunate enough to find." I lifted my glass one last time, looking around the table at faces that had become friends through an unexpected trial. "To Christmas Eve," I said, "and to remembering that character, not wealth, is what truly makes life rich." Outside, snow began to fall softly over the quiet street, covering the footprints of those who had left and blessing those who chose to stay.